seriously. And in coming to a meeting in ICAN in 2013, I'd actually not been active in the nuclear movement for quite some time, mainly because at the end of the French testing in the Pacific, we even had a stop to testing, but that was after 30 years of nuclear testing in the Pacific. And so coming back to joining ICAN and being thrown into, in fact, a lobbying exercise straight away, I have had a chance over the last few years to re-look at the Pacific Ocean and the Pacific region, the South Pacific Island region, and I am stunned by the fact we played such a role without any choice in the development of these weapons. And so I stand here remembering our Pacific nuclear-free and independent Pacific campaign, which was so active in the past. And it was also a very long campaign against nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific. And let me just recap for you what that was. For 30 years, we had France testing its nuclear weapons in Tahiti, or what is called French Polynesia. And in fact, it may sound politically incorrect to say that, but in fact it is true. That is still a colony in the Pacific. And hence our independence movement, because we have had the use of the Pacific Islands because they were territories of larger states that actually use these lands for their weapons development. So I first got involved really as a young person at the University of the South Pacific, and I never regarded myself as someone who would be an activist or get involved, but what moved me, even as a very young, quite shy person, was the efforts of our scientists and people in the movement to explain radioactivity and to explain what was happening. And I wonder if I would be involved now if I didn't live at a time, it was in the 1970s, where we had active atmospheric tests of these weapons, if you can imagine that. And I would like to share, I think, the contribution of the Pacific. We were in Fiji, and we could say Tahiti was far away, but we didn't. And we never thought that what was happening would escape us. And I think we have a contribution to make now to the world, that this is the thinking that is going on now too, and it should be. There is no place that really will escape the effects of radioactivity. But I'm glad, I suppose, that I had that insight, because once I saw a little diagram with a big explosion and the radioactivity that would go into the atmosphere, but also in the Pacific case, it has struck me as well. We, in terms of the world nuclear testing, our tests have affected the ocean, and that's unique as well. We then face the effect of radioactivity on the fish and our food chain and on Pacific people. But deeply, deeply, we felt totally disregarded as peoples. And I think that was a solidarity across the Pacific. If you think of Papua New Guinea, which could easily have ignored the tests, or Solomon Islands, or Vanuatu, or Fiji, or Samoa, or Tonga, or the smaller states, Tuvalu and Kiribati, and even Niue or Nauru, we have this commitment and solidarity across the Pacific. And I would like to say, I think that's what's happening in the world now, and that's what has helped this campaign. I'd like to remind you of the Marshall Islands, also not here. From 1946 to 1956, you have the Marshall Islands being subject to the United States test and development of these weapons. And those countries have all experienced contamination and illness and death. And that's the legacy they're still experiencing today. Someone else mentioned the fact that these are particular weapons. Someone, I think, right at the beginning it was Felicity, how diabolical they are really, because the seed of the first radioactivity is passed on through generations. And you've just heard of the tests in Australia and the Lester sisters saying they are conveying their father's words. 3 days ago, I was in Fiji in a civil society meeting, an international one, where we were on a panel called Rising Seas and the Nuclear Issue. I would say our active nuclear movement is not so active anymore, but we've had a particular role by Pacific Island states and governments. And that's an interesting switch that in fact our governments are remembering the legacy. They're not forgetting, and I'm very proud to say that in that 122 nations that voted to adopt the treaty, 9 were Pacific Island states, and 6 have already signed the treaty. Again, it's that memory and the solidarity of even disregarding distance. There's no sense of distance. So I think, you know, in the course of this whole campaign, I learned a lot by going to the humanitarian conferences. I must admit I was skeptical. It sounded too big a thing to say you could ban these weapons. We had gone through 30 years of protest in the Pacific, and you simply had the nuclear armed states saying, it doesn't harm you, it's fine. And that has been the message. I mean, that's the message the Pacific got. So in this panel I was with, there was literally someone from Bikini, who is a second generation, Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. He was mentioning the cancers that just are going on around their population. You had someone who had children. They are on Eniwetak, which now has a huge dome, which is the United States version of how you deal with radioactivity. You simply cover up all your rubbish. And I was surprised, I still can be surprised by things. There's an image of the dome, it's so close to the sea. When there's bad weather, the dome is reputed to be cracking. There's questions about that. So I think we have enough evidence, all of us who know, there's enough evidence about these weapons. Now there's been a shift, and states and campaigners, and I want to say I was moved yet again seeing that vote in the UN, because it was, you know, the whole, I learned a lot from the states that made a crucial decision to host a humanitarian conference. And even in one year, there were 2 humanitarian conferences, Mexico offering to host one and Austria doing the other. And to me, it was this cumulative evidence, and doctors, scientists, philosophers repeatedly talking about these weapons that gave us, I guess, the ammunition to keep working. So now there is a shift, and we have this treaty. I think we should build on it, and states have been convinced, and they're using their power and voice, and I think that's very much part of ICAN's success. It is global, it's international. The campaigners work in every region in the world, and I do want to acknowledge that we needed these non-nuclear weapon states to take the moral and other initiative, and they have used their power in the UN, and they have gone through voting to start negotiations. They have done all the majority voting until the point of the treaty, and I think we should give. One of the most moving things for me when the Nobel was granted was even to see that little press conference in the UN of some of the key states and ICAN members speaking. Look at that. There is such a balance and harmony between the states who have to do the work and the campaigners who actually convince them to do that. So now I think we have the treaty. It's a very different philosophy behind it. I'd urge you, I read it again in a different time, and the preamble will tell you everything about this different view of nuclear weapons, and I think that's the majority view. What strikes me, even 40 years after first being a young person and knowing radioactivity was just to the right of us in the Pacific, if you have a map, a flat map in your mind, is that we still have no answer to radioactivity and to these weapons. And so to prohibit them, and to then eliminate them is necessary. And the treaty has that. It covers all the things about nuclear weapons. We don't have in other treaties. It spells it out. It says how it could be done. And I'm very grateful to ICAN for actually getting us to this point. So all of you in Melbourne, thank you for ICAN, and ICAN Australia, thank you particularly. And it is definitely a global movement, but this was the seed and this was the start. So I will enjoy with all of you later on just actually seeing the prize. But as Tim says, there's a treaty, it needs 50 countries to ratify it and to come into force. And then fortunately the content of that treaty gives no reason to say we don't know how to get rid of them. There's a process and it can be done. So thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here.